What's good, everybody? I'm Blitz5, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about PUBG console, and I'm obviously referring to PUBG on the Xbox One and also on the PlayStation platform. We're all part of the PUBG console community. I keep saying that, but I kind of want to get that going because I don't want to separate it from Xbox to PlayStation. I really think we should all be part of the console community, and hopefully we'll be receiving updates and all that stuff at the same time. And with that, there's actually an interesting post that just got posted over the weekend called the Console Dev Report #1. And I know we got a lot of new players here on the PlayStation platform and even some new players on Xbox that have messaged me. So I'm going to try to quickly explain what's going on here. So I think we need to take a step back before we get into this Dev Report #1. And that is that over the summer, PUBG put out a campaign and kind of a roadmap called Fix PUBG. And this was mainly geared toward PC and trying to fix that platform because there were so many issues at the time. And they said eventually that these fixes would trickle down onto console, and at the time it was only Xbox One. So that initiative is over. I think it ended sometime in the beginning of the fall or the middle of the fall, and we're kind of left with the game as it is now. It's on the 1.0 on Xbox. Obviously, it released 1.0 on PlayStation, and here we are now. And during that time, PUBG was also putting out weekly community posts for the Xbox One, just updating us on what's going on, what they're fixing, what issues they're having, feedback, community events. All of that stuff was basically baked into these community posts. Then after the 1.0 launch, they kind of moved this to a bi-weekly post because they had less information to give us on a week-to-week basis. So with the launch of PlayStation 4, we have now moved to the Console Dev Report, and they said that this is going to be replacing the bi-weekly community post. So here we are with the first report, and this is focusing on frame rates and how PUBG can improve this for all console players. So if you've played console before, obviously I have on Xbox, and I'm assuming you guys have too if you're watching this video, you've probably suffered some issues with close quarter combat, and this is whether or not you guys are hot dropping to a really popular location, such as, let's say, boot camp on Sanhok, or if you make it into a final circle and there's a lot of players left, or you come across multiple squads at one time. More often than not, the system starts to chunk a little bit and you lose frame rates in this situation, especially if people are throwing grenades and smoke grenades, or if there's a care package in the area, an airdrop, really going to start to cause problems. And this is super unfortunate because these are huge moments in the game when you're dropping next to a lot of players, or if you're in the final circle. It's really important that you stay alive and that the frame rates are working so you can actually play the game as intended. And we also see this having a huge effect when we try to play the war mode or the event mode on Xbox, which isn't out on PlayStation yet, but this is like the weekly community event that happens on the weekend. And it's kind of like team deathmatch where you play in a smaller circle, and in this area there's like 30 to 40 people landing in such a small condensed area that the frame rates can get so bad. Recently we had the VSS silent and violent game mode, and this was really tough to play when you got next to a lot of people. The frame rates just crashing really bad, and I play on the Xbox One X with an SSD, so you really can't get any better performance than that, at least on console. So this is a huge issue that PUBG needs to work towards fixing, and this post is kind of about that. And before we get into all this stuff, I want to mention some stuff that PUBG has actually mentioned in the past. I've made some videos about this, so I'm kind of aware of what's going on. And part of the issues with frame rates and calculating all this stuff is that there's so many resources being used when you play the game, especially when there's a lot of players nearby, because the game needs to load, send packets, the internet connection, your ping, the console is loading all the information of all the enemies nearby. So say you land at boot camp, to use that as an example again, if you see players in front of you, the game needs to load if they're picking up a new gun, how much ammo they have, if they're taking damage, you know, if they're taking a first aid and their health is going back up. You need to load all of that information. Not only is your Xbox loading it, but you're receiving that information through the internet, through the server. It depends on everybody's ping and the packets that they're sending, and it gets really complicated. So there's two different major things that they're breaking this down into, and that's people that are in your view spectrum and people that are outside your view spectrum. And obviously people who are in your view spectrum are the most important in taking up the most resources because you can physically see them, right? So for example, if someone is behind you, you don't really need to know if they're holding an AK or not because you can't physically see them on your screen. But the person in front of you, it's really important to know whether that person is not holding a weapon or not, because then you can proceed with what you're going to do next. So they said that the people in front of the view spectrum really do take up a lot of resources because they're trying to be as accurate as possible with what's going on with their movement, etc., etc. And in the past, PUBG has had issues with players skipping across the screen because of this system not working out that well. So in this paragraph here, they mentioned that they're really working on optimizing the players and the information and resources in the view spectrum to make this more accurate and actually have less resources on the console. They didn't really explain exactly what they're doing, so I was kind of confused here. They're just saying that they're trying to remove unnecessary calculations, so I'm not sure what that means, but they did do this. They've already created a system and they tested it with 30 bots, which is a pretty good assumption for close quarter combat. Usually I would say there's not more than 30 people landing at one particular location, or at the very end of the game there's usually less than 30 people. And with this new improvement, they've gone down from approximately an average of almost 8 milliseconds to under 6 milliseconds. So that's a 2 millisecond change in the game. And when you're receiving information like this and where someone's moving, this is really huge. If you think about it, if someone's zigzagging, if you're receiving updates every 8 milliseconds, you might miss part of that zigzag if they're making very fine movements like left and right, dancing around as you try to snipe them. And bringing this down to 6 is a pretty big improvement. And some of this, sometimes it went even almost up to 10. And some of the lowest parts here are more towards 5. So this could be, almost a 4 to 5 millisecond change in the greatest variances there. So this is kind of big. Again, when you're dealing in milliseconds, this stuff is so small and so fast. But when you're dealing with this on a millisecond to millisecond basis with people making fine movements in the game and hit detection, this stuff makes a big difference. So the lower and lower PUBG can get this number down millisecond wise is huge for us console players. And then moving on to outside the spectrum, this is what I was talking about before, is loading people behind us and what information they have. So in this post, they kind of talked about there's 2 things to consider when they look at a character. That's the mesh of the character and the physical body of the character. Mesh is mostly related to the character model, like the sounds, the gunfire. So those are things that you're always going to need to hear, right? If they're behind you, you still need to hear if they're firing their weapon or if they're making any noises walking around. Then we have the physical body of the character, which I was mentioning before. If the player is behind you, you really don't need to know what outfit that person is wearing or what shoes they have on and all of that kind of information. So in this paragraph here, they were kind of talking about that they don't need to calculate all that stuff. And by only calculating mesh, more than half of the resources calculated have been saved. And this is huge. And we go down to the millisecond savings here. It's a little bit smaller, but honestly, because there's usually maybe more players outside of your view site, maybe they're behind a wall, this is a huge calculation save over time. And when you're dropping into this area, this is going to be huge for the game. And obviously any resources saved is a big deal for PUBG on console. So looking at this graph, we went from about 1.5 milliseconds here on average, you could say maybe a little bit less, to a little bit higher than 0.5 milliseconds. So it's like a saving of overall probably 0.5 milliseconds, maybe 1 millisecond if you want to look at that. But again, because a lot of people are usually in this situation where they're hiding behind something, this is going to account for a lot of players, especially when you're dropping in a very heavily populated area, again, to reference boot camp. But one thing is still going to be an issue. They only tested this with 30 bots. So I think this is going to have some limitations when we still do war mode and stuff like that in a very small circle. But again, this is just one step that they're taking to improve the game on console, and I appreciate this a lot. And I like that they're sharing this information. You don't always see this from companies. And PUBG, while I know you guys have been frustrated with some of the information here, lack of information, they always have done a good job, in my opinion, of at least giving us an insight when they do give us information as to what is actually going on here and what they're working on. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be reporting on all of these console dev reports and all of the latest and greatest PUBG news on console and even some PC stuff from time to time. So if you enjoy that, make sure you like the video, subscribe to my channel. You can catch me live streaming every day during the week. And that's all, folks. Thank you all for watching. I'm Blitz5, and peace out.